Today's story is tender enough to break your heart, yet strong enough to mend it back together, deep in a western winter where snow swallowed the valleys and the wind carried old grief. This is where a broken rancher and a woman no one wanted crossed paths, where sorrow met defiance and fate quietly shifted the ground beneath them. It began with just 2 silver coins, small, simple, and yet powerful enough to rewrite both of their lives. Before we kick off this adventure, don't forget to hit like on the video and let us know in the comments where you're watching from. All captives had been taken, every last one, except for a single Apache woman no one wanted. The dust had settled, wagons rolled off with their human cargo, and the holding pens that once trembled with fear now sat nearly empty. Only one space remained occupied. She crouched in the farthest corner, knees pulled tight, bare feet tucked beneath her like she was keeping warmth from abandoning her. Long black hair hung in tangled strands across her face. A dry streak of blood marked her mouth to her jaw. Rawhide bindings cut into her wrists, leaving angry welts. The deerskin dress she wore had been torn at the side, ripped down the chest, exposing scratches and bruises that ran across her collarbone, shoulder, and the swollen marks around her ankles. Proof of being dragged earlier. But she didn't cry, didn't plead, didn't tremble. She simply stared, steady as stone, chin lifted, breathing slow, as if daring anyone to come closer. The traders had given up long before. "Too wild," one man muttered earlier. "Bit me till I bled." Another laughed, saying she spit like an animal. A third called her worthless because she refused to kneel when commanded. So they left her, the one no one wanted. Not worth the trouble. Just then, Varron Creed stood near the feed shed, arms folded over his broad chest, the late winter air tightening across his coat. His wagon waited a few yards off. He hadn't come here for company. He came for grain, new harness straps, and a hinge to fix the barn door. The kind of errands he forced himself to do twice a season, nothing more. He never came looking for women. Not since 5 winters ago, when he buried Elowyn Ray and their little boy, Thorn Wythe, beneath frozen earth within 7 days of each other, and stopped speaking to God afterward. He was tall, built thick through the shoulders from years of breaking land, hauling lumber, and raising stock. Once, long ago, he wore a cavalry coat with ranking bars stitched along the shoulders. That life was gone. Now he wore a patched canvas coat, a gray wool scarf, gloves sewn 3 times over. His hat brim hung low, dusted with snow. A scar on his left forearm ached this time of year, but pain had become just another forgotten companion. He didn't know why he kept looking at her. It wasn't pity. He'd long run dry of that. It wasn't curiosity nor interest the way men nearby had shown. Maybe it was the way she sat straight despite everything. Or maybe it was because her expression looked too much like the one he wore when alone, cornered, wounded, waiting. He walked toward the pen. The trader glanced up from his ledger, surprised. "You want that one?" the man scoffed. "Don't waste your coin. She ain't broke. Near snapped Jex Hollard's finger this morning." Varron said nothing. He reached into his coat, pulled 2 silver coins, and extended them, eyes still fixed on her. The trader grabbed the coins quick. "Suit yourself," he grunted. "Don't say I didn't warn you." He cut the rawhide ties and stepped back like she might bite. She didn't move. She just watched Varron. Her eyes were dark, sharp, studying, calculating. She had seen enough men to know every type. Those who demanded obedience, those who demanded silence, but she did not drop her gaze. Didn't rise, didn't shrink back. Varron stepped inside the pen. The ground smelled of cold hay, sweat, and dried blood. His boots broke frost with each step. She shifted her weight slightly, bracing. He stopped in front of her and extended his hand. Not soft, not coaxing. Just offered it. She didn't take it. He didn't pull back either. She stood up slowly. Her muscles stiffened. Her arms burned from where rawhide had cut flesh. Her feet stung from cold earth, jaw tight, spine straight. She stepped forward on her own. He moved aside, letting her walk out. The wagon ride home was silent. She sat in the back, arms wrapped around her knees, blanket drawn tight after he'd tossed it to her without a word. She didn't thank him. She didn't look at him. Her eyes stayed fixed on the trail behind them, memorizing paths, measuring escape lines. Varron focused ahead. He didn't speak, didn't look back. When the wagon passed the ridge near his homestead, his thoughts drifted, as they always did, to 2 stones under a lone cottonwood tree. No one else had stood atop that ridge in 5 years. No footsteps but his. By sunset, the chill sharpened. The wind carried snow across the valley. As he pulled into the yard, Ruger barked once, then settled back into silence. Almost as if even the dog understood something had changed. Varron Creed stepped down from the wagon, unhitched the harness, and carried the grain into the shed. He never checked to see if Nayrra followed. He just moved through the cold like a man used to silence. When he came back out, she was gone. He paused, eyes sweeping the timberline where frost clung to every branch. He didn't call her name, didn't shout into the dark. Instead, he walked inside, stirred the flames to life, and set a plate of beans and bread near the hearth. Then he sat by the window and waited. He didn't know what he wanted more, her to run or her to stay. Nearly 2 hours passed before the sound came. The faint, brittle crunch of bare feet breaking ice. She stood in the doorway again, shoulders folding inward, ankles scraped raw, hair stiff from the wind. She looked like she had tried to cross that ridge and found nothing waiting but cold hunger and a night too long. Pride would have let her die out there. Survival brought her back. She didn't speak. She just moved toward the fire. Her hands trembled from the cold as the heat climbed up her arms, shaking loose the fear that had clung like smoke. She smelled of bark, ash, and wild panic burned thin, but she didn't try to flee again. Varron slid the plate closer. She took it, turned her back to him, and ate quietly, every bite steady, every swallow slow. He watched the rigid line of her shoulders soften, just enough to show she was still human. Her eyes no longer flicked towards the door. That was something. He leaned back, boots crossed, staring into the burning wood until the logs cracked apart. He didn't speak. Neither did she. But she had come back. For now, that was enough. She slept near the fire that night, curled tight beneath the wool blanket. Varron had pointed towards the back room, the cot waiting, blankets folded. But she never glanced that direction. She lay on the floor, small and silent, like a creature learning how to breathe again. When dawn cracked across the valley, she was still asleep, cheek pressed to her arm, breath faint but even. He didn't wake her. He fed the fire and stepped out into the bitter air. Frost popped beneath his boots as he crossed the yard. Ruger trailed close behind, tail dragging low, as though the dog sensed the shift in the house. Inside the barn, warmth lingered in old hay and the smell of horses. He fed his stock, checked the troughs, rubbed down the mare's leg where she'd strained it last week. His hands moved from habit, but his mind wandered. What would she do when she woke? Slip out and disappear? Steal food? Grab a rifle if she got desperate? He hadn't locked a thing. That wasn't his way. If someone left him, they left without chains. But something about her silence last night didn't sound like escape. It sounded like a body that had reached its limit. When he returned to the cabin, she was sitting upright again. On the same blanket, knees drawn in, hair hiding half her face. She didn't look away, didn't shrink back. Just watched him, guarded as a cornered doe. Varron poured hot water into a metal basin and set it beside her. He didn't explain anything. She stared at it, then at him. When he turned away, she slowly reached into the water and began rubbing dried blood from her palms. That was how it went for the next several days. She spoke nothing. He asked nothing. He placed food near the hearth each morning, ate his own meal across the room. When he split firewood, she stood on the porch watching. When he came back, the floor was swept. No requests, no thanks, just motion. On the third day, she found a nail sticking up from the plank floor. She used the heel of one of his boots to drive it flush. Later, when Varron saw the scuff mark beside the head of the nail, he paused longer than he meant to. She began using the cot after that. Never shut the door, never turned her back fully toward the open room. But she slept elevated, no longer curled on bare pine boards. That evening he found her near the window, eyes fixed on the far ridge, the one that sat above his land like a scar. She didn't turn when he stepped beside her. She didn't move either. She simply lifted a finger toward the hill. "Those graves," she whispered. He nodded once. "My wife. My boy." He didn't add anything more. The room held the quiet for both of them. The kind you don't break unless you're ready. Varron Creed said only what mattered. "My wife. My boy." Nayrra didn't press him, didn't prod the wound. She just held her gaze on that ridge a moment longer, then walked away. That night, he left a simple wool dress folded across the chair beside the cot. Nothing fancy, something bought in town months earlier. Good cloth, soft weave, still carrying store dust. She didn't touch it until morning, after he had already stepped out into the cold. When he returned, the scent of firewood drifted through the room. She stood near the stove, stirring the coals, wearing that dress. It hung loose around her shoulders but shaped to her hips just enough. The neckline sat higher than the torn hide she'd worn before, but not by much. When she caught him looking, she turned quick, pulling the fabric tight, fingers braced like they didn't know softness belonged to her. He looked away too, not out of embarrassment, but because he knew what hunger in a man's eyes cost a woman. And he refused to be counted among the men she had escaped. The kettle hissed low and steady. Her borrowed boots scraped the floor as she crossed the room. Her limp had eased, still stiff, but not dragging. Bruises fading, joints loosening. She was younger than he had assumed, maybe 24, strong beneath the harm. Later, she stepped outside with him for the first time, gathering kindling, quiet, watchful, matching his pace without words. When she bent to reach a branch, her breath caught, hand pressing her ribs. Varron stepped forward instinctively. She lifted her palm toward him, not rejection, just warning. He stopped where he stood. They walked again, silent as snowfall across frozen pasture. That afternoon, he worked at the bench, mending the bridle strap. She leaned in the doorway, arms folded. Then, without being asked, she crossed the room, took a needle, and began stitching torn saddlecloth beside him. Her stitching was crooked, but strong. And hers, it was the first time their hands worked the same piece of day. When they headed inside, she lingered near the table. He ladled rabbit stew, potatoes thick, broth rich. She sat across from him, hesitated, like she expected someone else to take her place first. Midway through the meal, She finally spoke. "Why me?" He swallowed, looked at her, then said simply, "You didn't beg." She lowered her gaze, not smiling, but she finished every bite. That night she lay on the cot before the fire had faded, and when Varron walked past to hang his coat, she didn't flinch, didn't brace. Just closed her eyes and let sleep come. He sat by the stove afterward, watching flame lick iron, aware the room was no longer an empty house. Storm winds rose overnight. Snow drifted sideways across the valley. Dawn light never cracked through clean, only gray, heavy sky. Varron opened the door a moment, cold burning his face, then pulled it shut. "We'll be snowed in by nightfall," he muttered, rubbing heat back into his hands. Behind him, Nayrra sat on the cot, hair still damp from washing. A faint red line showed across her collarbone when the dress shifted. He looked her way. She saw it. Their eyes locked half a heartbeat too long. She tugged the fabric higher. He looked down, poured coffee into 2 tin cups, and handed her one. The silence between them was no longer defensive. It carried weight, shape, expectation. Someone from outside would ask why she trusted him, why he hadn't sent her on her way, why she hadn't vanished. Nayrra spoke first. "Where are your family buried?" He turned toward the frost-covered window. "Behind the barn, under the cottonwood." "You live out here alone? Since then?" He nodded. 5 years. Steam curled past her cheek as she sipped. She sat straighter now, more sure of her place, though her body still bore marks they both could see. Bruises fading. Limp nearly gone. But that scar, raised, jagged along her shoulder, would follow her into every season ahead. "You have no people left?" she asked. No answer came quickly. "No." She set her cup down and ran her thumb along the sleeve seam of the wool dress before pulling it further down her arm. "I was traded away 2 winters ago," she said. "Once to a man who beat me, next to one who tied me 3 days. Her voice held no tremor, only history. "And I was called cursed, because I spoke back, because I did not kneel." The fire cracked. He did not interrupt. She looked at him, not asking for rescue, not expecting pity, only stating truth, and letting him carry it with her. "The traders always said I was too much trouble," Nayrra murmured, eyes fixed on the flames. Varron Creed didn't answer, just stood there, letting her speak, giving space where others had taken it. "They called me cursed," she went on, "because I spoke back, because I didn't bow." Her jaw hardened. "They tied me to a post for 2 days before bringing me here. Still, I would not kneel." Varron nodded once. Behind him the kettle rattled, and the fire cracked in the stove. A crow cawed outside, sharp against the wind. She met his eyes. Not pleading, not defiant, just steady. "I stay because I'm not afraid here," she said. It was the closest either had come to naming whatever was taking root between them. Later, when the land vanished under a white sweep of winter, she helped him secure the barn doors. They moved together without speaking. She handed tools before he asked, and he knew when her strength faltered without needing to see her face. Ruger limped behind them, tail slow, keeping close. Inside, the cabin breathed warmth. Snow beat at the window glass, the wind hissing along the eaves. Varron lit 2 lanterns instead of 1. She stirred supper, careful and deliberate, her hands still learning the kitchen. He set 2 bowls in place. She set a third on the floor for Ruger. After they ate, she sat near the fire, rubbing her ankle, the hem of her dress riding just high enough to reveal a healing scrape. Varron worked leather at the table, though his eyes drifted to her more than his stitching. She didn't hide her bruised leg. didn't cover the skin showing above her chest. She simply watched how he looked. And when he didn't shift, not hungry, not entitled, she lowered her gaze, finding her answer in his silence. "I thought you'd want what other men wanted," she said quietly. "That's not why you're here," Varron replied. "I know that now." He walked to the coat rack, took down a heavy shawl, and placed it over her shoulders. She looked at it, then at him. Their hands brushed. Neither moved away. The next day, she fixed a latch on the storage bin with her own hands. He repaired her boots, good leather worked smooth, and she said nothing about it. When evening came, she sat before he did. Nearer this time. No touch, no words that rushed anything. But something in the air shifted. It grew warm where life used to feel hollow. The storm settled over the valley. Snowbank after snowbank sealed them in. Days blended one into another, white and quiet. No riders came. No voices passed the property line. Varron had lived years like that. But now the stillness felt different. With Nayrra, silence wasn't absence. It was awareness. She learned how he chopped wood, how he lined up tools, how he sorted gear in the barn. She didn't ask questions, but her eyes carried everyone. One morning she rose first. When he stepped inside, shaking off cold air, he found her clearing ash from the stove, folding the blanket she'd used overnight. Her braid hung loose over one shoulder. The wool dress fit her differently now, her body filling back into itself after days of food and sleep. Varron nodded toward the window. "Snow's easing," she nodded back. "I can help feed." The words were small, but the offering behind them was not. He hesitated only seconds before handing her a smaller coat. Lined wool, sleeves long but usable. She tied it at the waist with raw hide. The cuts on her hands had closed. The bruises on her arms had faded. They crossed the yard together, boots breaking frozen crust. Ruger limped along, happier for the movement. Inside the barn, horses stamped, blowing fog into straw. Nayrra moved slowly, but her confidence was growing. She measured grain, checked the trough, brushed the mare's flank with careful strokes. "You've done this before," Varron said from the stall doorway. She nodded once. "My mother's brother kept horses." That was all she said. But Varron understood the rest. Loss didn't need explaining. It just needed somewhere to rest. There was a small pause, thin as breath, before Nayrra added quietly, "Before he died." She didn't explain how. She didn't need to. Varron Creed met her eyes and gave one slow nod. That was enough. Later, while she swept the porch clear of snow dust, he split logs beside the woodpile. Her sleeves were rolled past her elbows, tendons rising along her forearms with every push of the broom. Eventually, she set the broom against the wall and walked over. "Can I try?" she asked, gaze fixed on the axe. He blinked once, then held it out. She gripped the handle, shifted her stance, studied the grain like she'd watched him do all week. He didn't advise, didn't correct, just stepped aside. Her first swing glanced sideways, the second bit cleaner. By the fourth strike, she split the round clean through, wood snapping like bone. Her breath lifted her shoulders, flushed heat into her cheeks. Varron's mouth curved, not a grin, just a quiet flicker of approval. She noticed. That night, when the fire burned low, she came to where he sat near the stove. Knife balanced across his palm, steel glinting as he polished the edge. She stood beside him, hesitant. "Will you show me how to say some words?" she asked. He looked up. "English?" She nodded. "I know some. Not enough." He set the knife aside. "What do you want to learn?" She looked around, the chair, the wall, the doorway, as if searching for a starting place. Then touched her chest. Name. He nodded. You, Nayrra. Then he pointed to himself. Varron. She shaped the sound slowly. Varron. It softened something in him. Not hunger, not longing, something quieter, something that felt like waking up after a season of ice. She sat close enough that their legs almost brushed. He handed her the tin cup. Cup, he said. Cup. Stove. Stove. Door. Door. Chair. She repeated the word, mispronounced it once, then laughed. A small laugh. Short, but alive. Varron looked at her mouth, saw the faint scar along her lip, and something shifted in him. Do you want to stay here? He asked. She stared into the fire a moment, hands closing around the tin cup. Then answered, I stay because I choose, not because I am kept. He nodded. That's how it should be. They didn't talk after that. They just sat, fire between them, something steady growing in the quiet. Later, when she rose to sleep, she touched his shoulder. Light. Barely a touch. He looked up. She leaned forward and pressed a soft kiss against his cheek. Not taken. Not stolen. Given. She walked to the cot, pulled the blanket over her, and closed her eyes. Varron stayed there long after the fire thinned to embers, her kiss warmer than any flame, warmer than anything memory had given him in 5 long winters. For the first time since Elowyn Ray and Little Thorn Wythe lay beneath that hill, he didn't feel like a man living beside loss. He felt alive. Morning broke gray and still. Snow had settled sometime during the night, leaving the valley hushed. The heat from the stove still clung to the cabin walls. Varron stirred before dawn, same as always, rising from the chair he'd fallen asleep in. He stretched, turned toward the cot. Nayrra was already awake, sitting upright, legs over the edge, hair falling loose over one shoulder. She rubbed her hands, still waking, then looked at him, and for the first time, no guarded stare, no bracing, no distance, just quiet acknowledgement. The kiss from the night before didn't need mentioning. Both of them already knew what it meant. It lingered between them now, no longer something avoided but something unfinished, newly begun. Varron stoked the firebox, laid fresh wood inside, got the coffee simmering. Nayrra washed her face, slipped into a clean undershift, then into the wool dress again. The shawl he'd given her days earlier remained neatly folded on the chair, untouched until now. As he poured coffee into 2 tin mugs, she finally lifted the shawl and wrapped it over her shoulders, like it had earned its place. They brewed coffee, smoked meat, moved through the morning in quiet steadiness. She asked what needed doing. He named the tasks, and they worked, hauling wood, repairing a hinge on the chicken house, feeding the horses. The rhythm no longer felt like survival. It was beginning to resemble a life. Around midday, Varron stepped into the lean-to behind the house and paused. Nayrra was seated beside an old wooden chest he hadn't touched in years. She didn't open it, just rested one hand on the lid, her fingers brushing over carved initials worn soft by time. That was hers, he said, his voice low. My wife's. Nayrra didn't turn. You kept her things? He nodded. Didn't know what else to do with them. Do you want me not to touch them? No, he said. It's all right. She lifted the lid carefully. Inside lay folded shawls, a small Bible with pages thin as ash, a hairbrush, and a dried bouquet tied with faded ribbon. A curled photograph rested on top, a light-haired woman standing beside a boy with a crooked grin. Nayrra lifted it gently. Your son, Varron nodded. Thorn Wythe. He fell from the bluff. He was 6. Her breath trembled. I lost a brother to the river. He was 8. Eintrons. We never found him. Neither spoke for a long while. Wind swept against the siding. Chickens scratched frozen ground near the barn. Nayrra set the photograph back into the chest, closed the lid, and rose. I won't take space that belonged to her. Varron looked at her long and steady. You're not taking anything. I don't want to be a shadow, she murmured. You're not, he said, certainty stronger than she expected. That night, they sat closer by the fire. Silence wasn't empty anymore. It waited, warm and still. Varron reached into the drawer and handed her a small comb, the one Elowyn Ray once used. You should have this, he said. Nayrra looked at it, then back at him, holding it against her chest before setting it beside her. She brushed loose strands of hair from her face. Firelight warmed her skin, glowed against the hollow curve of her collarbone. The dress had slipped lower across her shoulders again, revealing more than chance. He didn't look away. She didn't hide. Later, when she rose to go to the cot, she paused beside his chair. He looked up. This time she didn't kiss his cheek. She leaned forward and touched her lips to his. Soft, slow, intentional. When she pulled back, her gaze remained on his. He didn't move, didn't speak, but his hand lifted and brushed her wrist, only briefly, only to say stay without using a word. Then she walked away. The fire guttered low. Wind rose and fell, and Varron closed his eyes, not to forget what he'd lost, but to remember the warmth of what had chosen him. When snow finally began to melt along the ridge, something between them had settled into place. Quiet, solid, unspoken, but unmistakably real. The work carried on, feeding horses, splitting timber, hammering repairs back into shape. But the routine meant more now. 2 people choosing the same ground every morning. Staying. Nayrra moved through the cabin like it was hers because, by then, it was. Her English grew clearer. She asked more questions. She laughed once when Varron tried to pronounce an Apache word she taught him. He didn't laugh back, but the quiet behind his expression softened. One morning she stepped outside while he gathered feed. The sun was pale, ground still half frozen. She wore the wool dress freshly washed, cloth softened by the work of her hands. It fell gently across her shape now. The torn neckline hung lower than before, her curves no longer hidden beneath fabric. And she didn't pull it up. Not anymore. Not from him. She stood on the porch a moment, bare feet touching the chilled boards, pulling the morning air into her lungs. Then she stepped down into the snow and walked toward the barn. Inside, Varron was finishing with the feed bins. When he turned, he took in the sight of her. Not only the dress shaping along her waist, or the line of exposed leg as she stepped over a low beam, but something far more quiet and deeper. The way she looked back at him now, with certainty, with steadiness, with no fear left between them. You once said this place was only for the dead, she murmured. Varron wiped his hands against a rag, leaning back against the stall gate. I did. It isn't anymore, she said. He nodded once, honest as truth spoken plain. No, it's not. She stepped closer, fingers resting on the wooden stall edge. Do you want me here, Varron? Truly? He didn't move, didn't shift, not even a blink out of place. He only met her eyes directly. I would have never let you stay if I didn't. Even if you had never touched me or kissed me, I'd still want you here. She studied him, slow and steady. And if I gave you more than a kiss? A stillness stretched between them. Varron's chest lifted once with breath. He reached out, not hurried, not claiming, and laid his palm along her cheek. His thumb brushed a loose strand behind her jaw. "I won't take anything you don't give freely," he said. "I know that," she whispered. Her hand rose and settled against his chest, fingers spread lightly, touching the steady beat beneath flannel. "Then I'm giving." They said nothing after that. He lifted her carefully, arm beneath her knees, back straight as he carried her to the loft ladder. She folded into him without fear, arms hooked around his neck. The old hay was dry, quilts stacked nearby for cold nights he worked the cattle. She lay back, dress sliding from her shoulder, skin pale where scar met softness. They came together quietly. No noise, no force, no rush. He held her like she had never been broken. She reached for him like she was done fighting. His hands steady, her breath steady. Nothing trembling. Nothing afraid. When they finally rested, she lay against his chest, his fingers threading slowly through her hair. Snow fell soft outside, rafters shifting in the wind. "You don't have to become anything here," he murmured. "I know, but I want to be yours." "You already are." They stayed in the loft until dusk, speaking little. When they climbed down, she took his hand, gently, and did not release it. That night she didn't return to the cot. She went to his bed, pulled the blanket over them both, and the fire burned long. The silence settled heavy, but not hollow. Days stretched longer, sunlight rising earlier, warming the yard enough to soften the snow into patches of wet earth. Winter still crept in at night, but the mornings carried bird song, and the creek below the cottonwood spit fresh water over thawing stone. Nayrra no longer used the cot. Her shawl hung beside Varron's coat. Her boots lined up next to his. No word said it, yet everything declared it. She lived there, not as a stray, not as a rescued thing, as a partner. She tended more than animals now. Firewood stacked neat, bread rising, torn seams mended, ledgers balanced after Varron showed her how. Her handwriting sharp, deliberate. She learned quickly. Word traveled through Lobo Crossing before either of them stepped back into town. People always spoke, in places with too much land and too few lives to fill it. Some whispered that the quiet rancher had gone mad, taking in a wild woman. Others said she bewitched him. None dared speak it in front of Varron. That morning, after checking the fence line, Varron returned, coat dusted with frost, boots caked, jaw unshaven. Nayrra stood barefoot on the porch, face lifted toward the ridge. "I want to see them," she said. He didn't ask who. He simply nodded. They walked the trail in silence, boots crunching thin snow, wind pressing along the ridge. At the top, the thaw revealed posts marking 2 graves. No names carved, just smooth stones placed with care, iron nails driven in to keep scavengers from pushing the piles apart. Nayrra stood between them, palms hanging loose at her sides. "This one?" she asked, pointing left. "My son," Varron said softly. "Thorn Wythe." She knelt, fingertips brushing the cold stone, her head bowed, not in mourning for herself, but in respect for the boy she never met. When Nayrra finally spoke, her voice was soft enough to bend the air between them. "I would have fed him," she whispered, "told him stories." Varron Creed didn't answer, not because he lacked words, but because the weight of hers cut through places he had sealed shut for 5 long winters. His throat tightened. He hadn't shed a tear since Thorn Wythe fell, but her quiet offering reached that old wound without pity, without performance. She didn't mourn loudly. She simply stepped into the missing space, as if she had always known it existed. When she rose, she looked at him and asked, "Do they rest easy now?" "I think so," he said, "and I believe they'd have liked you." That evening, as she sat combing her hair near the hearth, she turned. "If I meet trouble in town?" He paused, not from uncertainty, but because truth deserved clarity. "Maybe," he said, "but you won't face it alone." She nodded once. "I want cloth for new dresses. I want to choose what I wear now." A faint smile tugged his jawline. "Then when spring settles, we'll ride in." She stepped close, smoothing her palms along the front of his shirt. "And what will they say?" "Let them talk," he replied. "I know who you are." She kissed his neck, slow, certain, and that night beneath heavy quilts, she rested with one leg draped over him, his hand lifting to rest across her waist. "Do you want children again?" she asked in the hush of night. He hesitated only a heartbeat. "If it comes." She lifted her gaze. "Then I'll stay long enough to see." He pulled her in closer. "You're not here because of a child, Nayrra." "I know," she breathed. "I'm here because I have a place, with you." Outside, the snow melted into dark silence. Inside, they stayed together without wondering whether either one would leave. By late March, mud replaced frost along the road to Lobo Crossing, and cattle bellowed again on the southern pasture. The ranch, once a frozen shell, filled with movement, dripping thaw, creaking beams, and steady work. Nayrra moved through it as though she'd always belonged. Her steps carried weight now, presence rather than survival. She wore a new dress she had stitched from dark blue calico Varron found at the back of his supply trunk. The fit matched her shape now, cut to her silhouette. The neckline modest, though every now and then, when she leaned over the table or knelt near the hearth, the soft hollow of her chest showed, and she did not pull fabric to hide it. He didn't look away. She didn't flinch. They shared that space like grown people who understood what presence meant. The morning began with routine. Varron breaking ice from the troughs, Nayrra preparing cornbread, beans, and sliced dried meat. When he came inside, she stood near the fire, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "What is it?" he asked. She lifted her hand, a small cloth bundle resting in her palm. "I was late," she said. He tilted his head. "Late?" "My moon," she clarified. The meaning settled between them slow and heavy. Not fear, not dread. Possibility. He stepped forward, unwrapped the bundle. Inside lay dried yarrow, old tribal medicine, a woman's signal, a test. "You're sure?" he asked. She nodded once. "Did you want it?" he added quietly. She answered without looking away. "I didn't know if I could. Not after all that was done to me. But if it's real, yes, I want it." He poured boiling water into the same chipped tin cup he'd used for years. "We'll see together." For a long time, neither spoke. The fire crackled, shutters nudged by soft wind. No fear. Just a gentle, unfamiliar calm. That afternoon, Varron rode into town for flour, salt, and a latch to repair the barn door. Nayrra chose to stay behind. He hesitated, but she lifted her chin. Not defiant, but certain, and he kissed her forehead before he left. When he returned, shoulders stiff from riding, saddlebags full, he found the cabin swept clean, Ruger fed, and 2 cups waiting on the table. "You came back," she said. His brow furrowed. "Why wouldn't I?" She lowered her eyes. "I've been left before." He reached into his coat and set a small, wrapped parcel on the table. She opened it. Soft leather moccasins, tiny, new. "For the child," he said. Her breath caught, but no tears came. She simply reached across the table and took his hand. That night, lying against his chest, she whispered, "If it's a boy, will you name him Thorn again?" "No," Varron said softly. "This one deserves his own name." "And if it's a girl?" He paused, only long enough to make room for meaning. "We'll choose together." She smiled against his shoulder, small, steady, carrying a strength that didn't need words. And when sleep finally claimed her, Varron Creed stayed awake a while longer, his hand resting at her waist, tracing the rise and fall of her breath. There was no waiting anymore, no fear she might vanish overnight, no past still clawing at them. Loss hadn't disappeared, but something new had begun to take root, as sure as spring thawing the valley. Winter had forced them to survive. Spring allowed them to live. When spring settled in for good, the snow cleared from the ridge and soft earth pushed through beneath their boots. The creek spilled quick through the rocks, swollen from meltwater, and the cottonwood above Thornwythe's resting place began budding green again. The ranch breathed differently, and Nayrra moved differently too. Not weak, not worn, but slower, gentler. Her palm often rested low across her stomach, even before anything showed. She didn't speak of it much, didn't demand attention. She simply adjusted, sleeping longer, eating more, walking softer. Her silence wasn't protective anymore. It was full. Varron noticed every change, how her back tightened when she lifted a kettle, how her eyes softened whenever he reached for her hand at night. Months earlier, she had stood in his doorway like someone who refused to kneel. Now she leaned into him, like she knew exactly who would stand beside her. On the first clear day of May, he brought her into town. She wore the blue calico dress she'd sewn, shawl over her shoulders, braid tied low. He hitched the wagon slow, measured, almost ceremonial. People stared as he walked with her through Lobo Crossing, whispered under their breath. But no one spoke it aloud, not with him nearby. At the general store, she asked Redden Vale about thread, thimbles, and yard lengths. She ran her fingers over soft fabric like someone relearning ownership of herself. Some women looked. Curious, not cruel. One even offered a small smile. Nayrra nodded back. They didn't stay long. Back at the ranch, as dusk thinned across the ridge, she spread new fabric over the table and began cutting pieces. Slow, careful. Sewing for tomorrow. Not for need, for future. For herself. For the child. Varron brought her water, stood quiet, just watching. After supper, they sat on the porch, the wind warm, hills turning green, pine scent in the air. Nayrra leaned into him, her forehead below his jaw. He wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "I didn't believe I'd ever have this," she whispered. "Not after what they did." He waited, then answered, "They didn't take you from yourself. You held on." She met his eyes. "You didn't fix me." "I didn't try," he said. "And that's why I healed." They stayed there long after daylight dimmed. Stars rose one by one. Wind brushed across the porch boards. Then she asked, calm as steady rain, "Do you want to marry me, Varron?" His hand tightened slightly over her arm. "Yes," he said, "but only if my name becomes yours because you choose it, not because you needed saving." She turned to him fully. "You didn't save me. You saw me. And that's more." He rose, stepped inside the cabin. When he returned, he held a simple silver ring, Elowen Ray's mother's ring, untouched for years. He didn't kneel, didn't make promises shaped into speeches. He just offered it. She slipped it onto her finger. It fit. That night they lay beneath the quilts, her back against his chest, his hand resting warm over her stomach. They talked about names, about a garden fence, paint for the cabin walls, maybe a swing beneath the cottonwood where the wind always found its way through. When the lamp dimmed low and silence folded around them, nothing inside that silence frightened them anymore. The woman once sold like scrap now lay safe in her own bed, beside a man who never demanded her obedience. Her scars remained, his grief remained, but both finally had a place to rest. They chose each other, and that choice became their life. She would never be gathered or sold again. She wasn't someone's burden. She wasn't someone taken. She was home, and she was his. Not owned, not controlled, his partner, his family. For good. Finally, let me send my deep thanks to you. Your presence means more than you know. If today's story awakened something inside you, don't let the trail end here. There are many more tales of courage, devotion, and faith waiting to be discovered. Subscribe, comment, share, and come back as we continue this unforgettable journey. Thank you, truly. Aviso legal. Disclaimer. All stories are intended solely for entertainment and may include fictionalized scenarios or dramatization derived from historical contexts. While AI assists in production, human creators supervise and adjust every piece to maintain sincerity, credibility, and emotional quality. We adhere entirely to platform regulations regarding AI content, ensuring no deepfakes or misleading portrayals. Licensed materials are used responsibly. Republishing, modifying, or extracting content without authorization is not allowed. We appreciate every viewer who respects originality and creative effort.